The Pro Bowl roster is set, and there are some very questionable decisions, like there is every year. The Pro Bowl has been mostly an afterthought that even a lot of normal NFL fans haven't cared about, but this season may be different. Instead of the traditional football game, it is now a week-long skills competition that ends with a flag football game between some of the game's best players. The voting is separated into thirds: fans, players, and coaches, which can lead to some pretty wild snubs and misses. One of the most egregious snubs for the Pro Bowl this season was absolutely Tua Tagovailoa. He did lead all of the fan voting, so it's clear that both players and coaches didn't regard him highly, but his numbers do speak for themselves. He leads the league in passer rating, touchdown to interception ratio, passing touchdowns per attempt, yards per attempt, and yards per completion. We saw how much worse the Dolphins are without Tua behind center. It's clear that he's a huge part of that team. He's played in 12 games this year, and he has 3,200 yards and 24 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, while completing 64.8% of his passes. I get it. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow, they're all great, but it feels wrong not having Tua as a Pro Bowler. One of the names I do keep hearing as a quarterback snub is Justin Fields, and I just completely disagree with that. I don't think you can overlook how bad he was at the start of this year to really justify that he should be a Pro Bowler. He has completely put the Bears' offense on his back and is almost the entire reason for their success, but that doesn't change the fact that he was bad to start the season. Through the first 7 weeks, Fields was only completing 55.9% of his passes and had just 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He wasn't even making a massive impact on the ground and had just 2 touchdowns. I think he's been absolutely fantastic as of late, but it seems silly to suggest that he deserves a Pro Bowl spot. Geno Smith making the Pro Bowl is so awesome. I mean, he's been in the league for a decade and he's finally getting that recognition. That's just an awesome story. Jalen Hurts is the starter and absolutely deserves it, but at the same time, if you're going to discredit Tua Tagovailoa for his talent around him, I just don't know why Jalen Hurts gets in. Kirk Cousins was the last quarterback in. I think that's fair. I personally would have voted for Jared Goff for that third spot, though. My vote for the biggest snub this year for the Pro Bowl would absolutely be Christian McCaffrey. I am absolutely just astounded that he didn't get in. Maybe him getting traded midseason from the Panthers to the 49ers played a role, but it shouldn't have. He has more scrimmage yards than all 3 of the guys that did make it in front of him: Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, and Miles Sanders. In 14 games this season, McCaffrey has over 900 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, plus over 600 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. I just don't see how he doesn't make it. The only one of those 3 that I would argue is more deserving would be Saquon Barkley. McCaffrey probably should be second, and I'd say Pollard versus Sanders is close to a toss-up, but I do think I'd go Pollard just since Sanders is kind of a non-factor in the passing game. On the AFC side, I think it was perfect though. Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry, exactly what I would have gone with. You can make the case for Austin Eckler. I mean, he's been a touchdown machine, but I just wouldn't be able to take him over the other guys. Wide receivers is always a very difficult position when it comes to the Pro Bowl. I think one of my biggest pet peeves with the Pro Bowl is when a player has missed a significant amount of time and gets selected, and I just don't think Jamar Chase should have been a Pro Bowler this year. He missed 4 games, plus he was injured during the Bengals bye, and I think that's enough to not make it personally. He's been amazing when on the field, but he has missed almost a third of Cincinnati's games, and in those games, Joe Burrow was incredible and the Bengals went 3-1. Chase has 880 yards and 8 touchdowns. I personally would have gone with Jalen Waddle over him. Waddle has over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns, while somehow still getting targets despite having to share the field with Tyreek Hill and not being the number 1. I just think the injury really makes it more clear that Waddle is more deserving. The other 3 wide receivers in the AFC East are Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and Devontae Adams. I'd say all those are pretty much no-brainers. The NFC is a bit harder of a conference to decide from. Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown both made it. There's no world where either one of them isn't a Pro Bowler. But then I'd say there are a few guys that could have jumped in. CeeDee Lamb and Terry McLaurin McLaurin both made the Pro Bowl as starters. CeeDee's been good, but he isn't necessarily the focal point of the offense at times and is a lot more reliant on other factors in Dallas. McLaurin is the focal point in Washington, but there are a lot of guys with better stats and more usage. I would argue that Amon-Ra St. Brown has been right there with them, if not even more deserving. He has 89 receptions, good for 4th most among all wideouts for about 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. I think I would have chosen him above both CeeDee and McLaurin. I can understand why not, though. I think Tyler Lockett was also right there in the mix, but it is hard to put him over any of the previously mentioned guys. Sometimes the Pro Bowl selections can be based purely on name instead of who is truly deserving, and that is exactly what happened with the offensive line. Quentin Nelson and Orlando Brown have no business being Pro Bowlers this year, but both were named starters. Nelson has been mostly just average this season, but he's one of the only guards in the league with name recognition, so he gets the nod. The Orlando Brown selection is horrible, though. He is giving some of the most pressure in the entire league. He is probably the worst left tackle in the AFC West this year. I mean, that's just a horrendous, awful selection. I also think Andrew Thomas probably should have been a Pro Bowler for the Giants. He's been one of the best tackles in football this season, without a doubt. The rest of the offensive Pro Bowlers, I do agree with for the most part, though. Some of the worst Pro Bowl selections definitely came in the secondary. Xavier Howard making the Pro Bowl is a pretty clear example of what happens when name recognition gets you somewhere. You can probably name 20 guys that have outperformed him this season in the AFC alone. Quandre Diggs was another horrendous choice. I think he's been underrated for most of his career, but he's been pretty average this year, and his Pro Bowl nod just doesn't make a ton of sense. I know a lot of people hate the Jair Alexander pick as a Pro Bowler. I don't love it, but I think it's still like a okay decision. The only 2 rookies to be named Pro Bowlers are both in the secondary, Sauce Gardner and Tariq Woolen. Both have been incredible this season. I think the worst snub was probably Tyson Campbell, and that seems like something a lot of people are saying now. He's blossoming into one of the better corners in the game, and he deserves a lot more recognition, but perhaps he's not as known yet by fans outside of the AFC South. If you're wondering who was by far the worst Pro Bowl selection this year, it was easily TJ Watt. It's not even close. TJ Watt has only played in 7 games this year. He has barely played due to a knee injury. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that he's a Pro Bowler. He hasn't even been the best edge guy on his team this year. It's been Alex Highsmith. I was also really disappointed that Matt Milano somehow didn't get the nod. I mean, he's really done it all for Buffalo, blitzing, tackling, getting back into coverage. He's been one of the best this season, but no Pro Bowl. I think the biggest shock for me personally was Javon Hargrave not being a Pro Bowler. I'm a Commanders fan, so I do watch a lot of NFC East football, and I was pretty astounded that Hargrave wasn't a starter. He's been huge for the Eagles' success this season, and he definitely deserved it. Philadelphia ended up leading the league with 8 selections, and the NFC East alone had 13 of 27 NFC starters, and most of them were deserving. There are always Pro Bowl misses, and that's just the nature of the system, but something does really rub me the wrong way about Tua Tagovailoa and Christian McCaffrey leading their position in fan voting, but not even getting the Pro Bowl nod. While some guys like TJ Watt and Xavier Howard don't deserve even some recognition. Sometimes the Pro Bowl is just a joke.